When my friend and colleague Maggie asked me about this, first of all, I was so happy that all of you would be here in our city. It's a blessing for our city. For any time women and men come together that have this great passion for the human person, for the sacredness and uniqueness of every human person, when that happens, things change. The environment changes for the city, and I'm so happy that you came here. She also asked me to talk, and I'm not so happy about that, but I come here not as an expert. I'm simply a pilgrim. And what I hope to do, just for a few minutes, is to describe how my life as a pilgrim has been transformed by an appreciation for the uniqueness of each of God's creatures. And I'll get on with that because you know that in your heart, in your soul, and the deepest part of who you are. That's why you do what you do. That's why Miss Newman inspired us with all that she said, because she understands that every child, every young person, every adult is unique in God's eyes, and we are called to rejoice in them. So I come to you as a pilgrim. My first experience about the fractured world of ability and disability happened when I was about between 5 and 6 years of age. I had a cousin, and my mom and dad told me he was my cousin, but he was different than me, and I needed to take care of him and don't treat him differently. I didn't know what they meant by Down syndrome, but they said this is what he is. That's how they said it. And so Joe and I grew up for a few years together in the same neighborhood. What I want to share with you is an insight I had at between 5 and 6 years of age. I watched my friends who were baseball junkies like me in the summertime, older guys, make fun of my cousin. I wasn't strong enough or courageous enough, I was a little boy, to stand up for him, but I remember hurting inside. I watched the older boys pick on this cousin of mine, and he wasn't doing anything wrong. He was simply being himself. His name was Joe, and so Joe Talley was simply being Joe Talley, but the boys were picking on him. And I remember asking in a way a 6-year-old would ask the mystery of God, why is this so? And I've reflected on that many, many times because even at an early age, I had a sense, and I remember it consciously, that the world, we were broken. Something was broken in us. I didn't use that language, but why couldn't we see good in each other when good was always there? Like many of my generation, the infamous 60s, I came close to being lost when I was a teenager and young adult. By the mystery of God's providence, I got through school. I did a BA in philosophy. I started out as a Baptist boy. I read too much, and I became an agnostic in college. But then somehow God brought me to the Roman Catholic Church, and I had a profound conversion experience, and not only became Catholic, my heart was driven to that interiority that the authors talk about. But my formation was cerebral. I'm a cerebral guy. I think. That's what I do, and I read, like so many of you. And so my faith was true, and it was powerful, it was real, but it was one-sided. It was intellectual. But I began my real formation after I tried seminary once and failed miserably. Not the work. Celibacy wasn't such a sharp thing for me at that time. So I walked away from seminary, and I got a job in Atlanta in the projects as a social worker. And for 5 years in Atlanta, I worked here with those who were throwaway children, with the abused and neglected children of Atlanta. And I saw especially how those children and teenagers with special needs, specific needs, were warehoused. And part of me began to react to that. My heart was being awakened, and my head knowledge of the mystery of God and my heart knowledge of suffering in the world were trying to find a place together. I left social work and the projects, and I entered seminary. Idyllic monastic setting full of a gigantic library full of books. And the battle went on in me, a head knowledge of God and a heart knowledge of God's people. And at ordination, though I knew that I was called to be a servant leader, I was still driven with this idea to communicate intellectually first. But all that changed. And it changed because of a mother, not my mom. It changed because a mother at one of our parishes had a child with special needs. And this mother wanted her child to learn about faith. So she went to her parish priest, knocked on the door, and asked the question, "What do you have to offer?" And what was his response? So this woman, this mother, like Maggie Rousseau, with great passion, went down to the archdiocese. That's where the big boss works. And she went to the archbishop and said, "My child wants to learn about our faith. What do you have to offer?" And what did he say? He said it kindly, with great nuance. But there was nothing there. So what did this mother do? This mother went back to her parish and began to talk to other mothers and a few fathers that would listen. And they began a program on their own, finding pieces here and there to put together a program. Her name was Tony Morales. Tony Morales, her little program, eventually became de facto the Archdiocesan program. It was that successful. We started a camp. We still have the camp. You'll see a video of it tomorrow. Tony's Camp, named after her, where between 85 and 100 special needs teens and adults come together with 150 volunteers, and we have a love fest for 3 days. But back to my story. Tony Morales. After she began this program, and she told me this after it had happened, she said, Father David, that her parish was my first assignment as a priest. She said, Father David, every time a new priest would come to us, and we rotated in and out, it was one of those big parishes. She said, I would say a prayer, and I would throw a line into the lake with a big hook on it, and I would look and troll and look to catch one of you guys into the truth of who my daughter is, what this ministry does, and how God is all over it. And you bit. In 1990, I took the hook of love that Tony Morales sent out, and I've been involved with the ministry ever since. And this happened because a mother would not hear no as an answer. A mother who brought a child into the world cared more about that child than anything else. Everything is possible if we put love on the front line. So, back to this conversion experience. As I was working with Tony Morales and doing well as a parish priest, our archbishop, for whatever reason, God only knows, told me to go to Rome and get a doctorate in canon law. Now, for those of you who are not of the Catholic tradition, canon law is probably one of the most boring things in the world. I mean, really boring. I tell my friends that I wanted to study spirituality, but for my sins, they gave me law. So I went to Rome and fumbled around and got through the licentiate, which is kind of a heavy-duty master's. And then I was looking they wanted me to get a doctorate. And so I was looking for something to do. And it's all academic and legal and all boring. And it was beyond me, most of it, actually. But I did find something, because Tony Morales wrote me and asked me, how are you doing? Remember our people in your study. Yes, a mama showed me the way. And so for the next 2 years, I researched and wrote a doctorate on what is now called inclusion. There was a new little law in Roman Catholic law that said catechesis must be offered to all people, no matter their ability or disability. The second thing this law told me was, and I knew this in my heart, was that mothers and fathers are the first and best teachers of the way of faith. So I finished the work and came back home and began to work full-time, first in the court down in Atlanta, and then as a pastor. 2 years ago, they gave me this new job. And I'm able as a bishop now to go wherever I am and proclaim that the notion that all of God's creatures are precious in His sight. I wanted to give you that little sense of my conversion story because I was a hard case. And we have lots of men and women in leadership positions in our faith traditions that may have been like me, very cerebral, nice folks, but don't have a clue that everyone doesn't think like they do. Don't have a clue that everyone doesn't hear and process reality as they do. I was so focused on how I did things. It took me a long time to understand that all of you process it differently. And if I'm seeking to serve you, I can't focus on what pleases me. I must instead understand what touches your heart so that I can take God's love, which is love, and touch your heart through whatever communication tool I have to offer. For the next few minutes, what I want us to do at the table, because Ms. Newman showed me that's the way to go, table discussion. I want to talk about simplicity and humility in worship. Though there are great diversity in this room, I'm guessing there are people of many traditions and maybe a few of no tradition, faith tradition. But I hope the insights into what we call worship may have some effect in the way you do your own ministry, the human project, the preciousness of the human person. First of all, let's think about worship, the idea of worship. Merriam-Webster defines it as showing respect and love for God, especially by praying with others of faith. Worship in most every tradition that I know about is an action that we do with beliefs in our head, but with affectivity from the heart and in the presence of others. Worship is at the same time very intimate, like making love is very intimate. But making love is always with a partner. Worship is the same way. It's an intimacy with the mystery of God, not just in ourselves, but we find completion in the other. How do we worship? How do we worship in and with and through a community when the community is populated with a diversity of abilities and disabilities, a different way of affectivity? How do you worship personally, yet communally? When I was doing my doctorate in Rome, I read 2 authors specifically, not just the law. I read Jean Vanier, The Spirituality of L'Arche. And what he tells his teachers is that those our culture, our secular culture describes as disabled, some profoundly disabled, with very few corporate abilities that the world values. Jean Vanier, a doctorate in philosophy, said they were his best teachers. How could this be? Is Jean Vanier crazy? Or is he telling us something about a different way of experiencing, coming into contact with, and loving the human person? Above and beyond concept. Above and beyond the spoken word. It's the touch. It's the feel. Mother Teresa, when she would go, and I would see her work in Rome, she would go to an orphanage, and she wouldn't, because the language would be of a kid from all over the world, and so they wouldn't get her English or her broken Italian. But what they would get is when she would do this. She would come up to the child or the teen and start rubbing them and caressing them and looking at their eyes like this and making contact, not speaking, but listening to their affectivity, to her recognition that there was love and warmth in my hands. Jean Vanier says there is something there for us to learn. The second person that I listened to was Henry Nouwen. And Henry Nouwen talked about how many years ago was The Wounded Healer written? He talked about the wounded healer. And for most of us who are successful in academia, most of us who are successful in our careers, we don't think of ourselves as wounded. We go out to fix wounds, right? We're the doctors of the soul, and we fix others. And Nouwen said, no. If you really understand the revealed word of God, if you have heard the prophets, if you understand Jeremiah, if you have fathomed Yeshua de Nazareth, you come to understand that it is in brokenness that we find our completion. For we are all fragile creatures of Mother Earth, and we are all connected by Mother Earth. So, what I would ask the tables to do right now is to look at three concepts. My topic was humility and simplicity in worship. I want each table to take a minute or two and talk about humility and simplicity. But let me give you the definition of what humility is. Webster's talks about, and it's almost a conscious attempt to see yourself as not important or not special. That's not the real definition. Humility comes from humus, earthiness. Humility is about recognizing that we are connected to Mother Earth. We are all creatures. We all will die. We all have life by God's grace. Humility is recognizing that though we look so differently and act so differently, we are woven together as one family. We bleed the same blood, and we long for the same thing, which is love, to love and be loved. So I ask you for 5 minutes to talk about simplicity in worship from your experience, and then what you understand as humility in worship from your experience. And I'll call you back. Please. Everyone, please. Sorry to interrupt. I hope it was good conversations. So we're talking about worship, a mysterious thing anyway, praising the one we believe in, differently and yet together. And I'm suggesting that for all of us, maybe what we have to do is to learn to worship in simplicity and humility. So does someone have something to offer the whole? Let's start with humility. Not the thing that you see, I'm not worthy of anything. That's not humility. Humility is a spiritual knowledge of who you are. So, anyone talk about humility that you'd like to share with the whole group? Please raise your hand. Yes, ma'am.
The mic's going to come over.
I got the mic. Oh, she got the mic. Bill? Got it? Okay. Please.
I think part of it is being very honest with ourselves about the limits of what we can and can't know about people and how they're experiencing are. I think that the great spiritual temptation in working with people with complex communication needs is to make assumptions about them, prompt them into doing things that validate our assumption, and get off on feeling very inclusive, spiritual, inspired, when it might be experienced as degrading or inappropriate to the people we're doing it to. So I think that and also particularly, I think it's important to remember that when somebody has complex communication needs, we don't know whether they have a profound intellectual disability or whether they have unmet communication support needs. And we have to proceed with presuming competence with humility, with not assuming that we're getting it right, and continuously seeking feedback from the people we work with.
Presuming the best, yes. Competence, communication, yes. Yes, that was wonderful. Anybody else? On humility. What was your... Yes, in the back, please. Humility, being of the earth, being connected to one another.
From what I understand about humility is that from my parents' perspective, it can be very humiliating to go to church on Sundays. And the pastor here at Trinity, which is right around the corner on Moore's Mill, can be very demanding on how we worship our faith. And I'm like, which religion do you want to be? And I'm like, why do we have to worship on this Sunday evening? I'm like, I just don't know about this.
Thank you. The what I heard was we pastors can be very demanding, and we become, what are we demanding of? That someone with all of their heart proclaim that they are loved by God and that they are longing for love, and we become demanding and with all sorts of rules and regulations. That's what...
Being humiliated is not the same as humility.
That's right. That's right. That's right. Anybody else, any comments for us? The notion of humility in the back?
I think humility is really about grace and about accepting everyone as they are and be able to see the value, but also to be willing to accommodate. So I think humility incorporates everything. It incorporates grace, accommodation, all those things.
Yes. And what I hear when I hear that, and tell me if this sounds right to you, that humility in worship, humility in our work, in our communion with one another, is this notion that we are all connected. There are no automatons living in an isolated universe. That we all are part of a shared humanity, and our humanity was created by a relational God who longs to communicate self with other, and our work to be human beings, however we communicate, however we're able to proclaim ourselves, is to communicate to the other our love and our connection with them. Yes. Amen. Anything else with yes, sir?
Well, from my perspective, I come from a country where we have different tribes of people and different races. They are the races that think in themselves they are superior. but more so like in my tribe, we are the sort of the biggest tribe in the country. And so when I look at humility, it is then considering other tribes equally important and considering other races and other people who look different in many ways from me is equally important. And also be willing to embrace, other cultures and traditions and accepting.
Yes.
So for me, if that can be exercised, that is humility. Although we have an understanding that it's not something that comes as an event, like once we're talking about it, it should be a process. And this is something that we need to work on.
Thank you. You heard what he said. I think for me, I'm finishing up, I guess. I think for me, okay. I think for me that what we have to do as brothers and sisters is to recognize this call, especially with this group of individuals, especially with how we are already, that we are called to live lives of humility. But it's both a learned art. It's also a gift. It's a gift. The part of my little talk, I was trying to explain. This is my best friend, one of my best friends, Gianfranco Giusta, one of our priests, and he knows this. What I was trying to explain to you is that my conversion experience was from arrogance and isolation to joy and being connected to everyone. And though I've taken steps myself, it was really given to me. I was open to be changed, and I was changed. That sounds corny, I know that, but our faith traditions talk about conversion, that there is a power of love greater than any of us. And the power of love is beyond politics, overrides everything. Love transforms the earth. If we learn that Mother Earth is our home, and that whatever else is beyond Mother Earth is given to us too. And our work as citizens of this earth is to stay connected to brother and sister. First, to know them, to listen to them, to appreciate them, however he or she speaks or doesn't, sees or doesn't, feels or doesn't, however, whoever they are, to stay connected to them. And as we are connected to each other with that kind of intimacy, we reflect God. The scriptures say we are made in God's very image and likeness. We reflect the mystery of God when we are connected together. And humility, according to my tradition of saints, it is the first and greatest step to transformation. From arrogance and isolation to simplicity and connection with brother and sister. Any last comments before I'm done? Yes, ma'am.
I just want to say that if we are going to achieve simplicity and humility, our faith communities have to really become communities rather than organizations. They have become organizations with presidents, like you have some pastors acting like presidents with armor bearers, guards, and all sorts of things. And what that means is that the man of God has been elevated to a level where ordinary people, especially those who are poor and cannot contribute a lot in that faith community, cannot access him. Personally, they have to go through his secretary and the elders and the deacons and all those people, and they've elevated themselves to be gods. And so let's get back to being communities rather than organizations.
Amen. Any last comment? Well, I'm going to talk about it. I'm fine on time, but I'm about out. That's what I. But I want to plug on one of the events. If I were part of you, I want to see Miss Newman again to hear all of her stories, and that's here. But if you want to take a trip, one of the things that I would suggest that you think about is going to St. John Newman. I was the pastor when we built the church, and I won't tell you the whole story because you'll get it tonight. But I'll tell you this. that from the first moment I sat down with the architect, there were two things in my mind as pastor that I shared with the team, because it was a collaborative enterprise. Two things. One was this notion of Yeshua speaking about the Father. I am the vine and you are my branches. If you stay connected to me as a community, and I will always be connected with you, then everything is possible. For without me, without connection, you can do nothing. That was my first insight to the people. The second was, we want to build a church where there is no obstacle for anyone to worship here. And Atlanta did, and I think that's what tonight is about, because we won this, whatever the award was, we won, and you'll hear about that tonight. So please, if you want to go out to Lilburn, Georgia, please enjoy. Thank you all for listening to my little conversion story. I'm so happy that you're here. I'm a beginner and a pilgrim, and I take great courage in listening to the table conversation and looking at the faces of men and women who want to change the earth with the power of love.
Now stay where you are. You've got that on. We've got a little bit of time, and what strikes me, the wonderful way in which these two talks converged this morning. And I wonder if anybody's got questions that would either Bishop Talley or Barbara could respond to about things related to worship and inclusive worship. And I'll start with one, which is, I'll make a comment first, which I couldn't help but think about. You said you were a hard case in terms of a clergy person to try to change. In our field, there's a man named Michael Small who writes about people with multiple disabilities, and he sometimes says that people with multiple disabilities, especially behavioral issues, become people with severe reputations. And there are some clergy with severe reputations around this, or have been in the past. But so one of the questions is, how do Barb or you, how do we work with clergy to help them to have the sense of, let me tell a story. There was a church where they were bringing some people from a nursing home on a regular basis, and one day there was one of the first Sundays, there was a bunch of sort of noise being created because some of the couple of people were upset. And the pastor was able to get up and say, what you hear is the sound of community.
Yeah.
And just immediately dissipated the kind of anxiety or the kind of thing. How do we help people get to the point of being able to make those kinds of awarenesses on the spot that kind of flip an issue into a gift, so to speak?
That is a great question, and I think that's another example of many that come from those situations where a pastor or the person in charge is really thinking on their feet, right? But I think information, I'm still so grounded in that, whether that's information from Scripture, whether that's information from the documents that denominations or a faith community has put together, we have to be immersed in those things so that when that situation arises, we're prepared for that. So we have to be ready. I always say the first day, I'm just putting this in my school setting, is we have some really challenging behaviors that are part of our community in that place too. The first day of school is my busiest because I'm running from classroom to classroom to classroom, trying to pass out a pair of eyeglasses to the peers and the leaders of that community so that when they have a situation arise, a behavior, something that comes up, they have a pair of eyeglasses through which to view that situation, a lens of understanding of who that is. So again, that was a quick pair of community eyeglasses that person handed out. It was a quick look into, we're receiving this family, and therefore I want to just counter as my cheering section, or Marie's going to be part of the worship team on this day. It's a chance, again, to really allow people to say information is really powerful. And if we're the first to the plate with a pair of eyeglasses, it prevents misperception, which I think can often cause fear and be a detriment to community. So that's usually my best response with behavior issues.
Information, truly. An example for us, Maggie and I, when we bring new teenagers in to a learning session, a prep session before our weekend camp experience, and some of our campers have profound special needs, and these kids are wonderful kids, and they have strong faith, but they don't have any experience with any of these things, and so giving them information, giving them some understanding of how some of these men and women who will be older than the teenage counselors have these issues about communication. This is how they like to do this. So information is exactly right on that level. As far as pastors, two things. The lady, our sister that talked about the renewal of the church as community, amen to that. And that we have to all pray in our different traditions for a renewal of heart, because it has become a gigantic corporation. Our country is in love with corporations, and we have begun to see the mystery of God as a corporation with membership, and it's a free gift. So that's the first thing. The second thing is about pastors, your pastors. If the man or woman is longing to be a good shepherd, this is a tool set, and these are things that they really need to know about their community. It's like me trying to learn Spanish. I'm a gringo and I do poorly. Monsignor Justus has done a much better job, but all of us need in Atlanta to speak 2 or 3 languages to communicate God's word, because this is the UN now. We have 150 different nations in Atlanta represented. The last thing, though, it's about, if you'll allow me, it's about praying for conversion. I take priests and deacons to Tony's camp and invite them there. And some get it immediately. And some keep looking at their watch, wondering when it's going to be over. And that's the way it is. Some of us go there and we see a vision of the kingdom of God. Others kept looking for the next thing. So we have to pray for a conversion of heart.
Bishop, kind of a follow-up question on what you just said here. Follow-up question is, as the leader of the organization, yes, we want to strive towards where we began as a community, but my question is, how do you, when there's budgets, when there's hiring, when there's all of the fires that come up in the course of leadership of a large organization, how do you keep this on the agenda in a place that it gets time? A lot in the room is probably divided between those who have the capacity to keep it on the agenda and those who are trying to push it onto the agenda.
Right. Yeah, I hear you. And the questions are real. The thing that I would say is that for me and the one who drives me to do my work each day, it's a non-negotiable. There are other things that are negotiable about how we service our people, but taking care to respect and cherish individuals, especially those that Pope Francis is telling us, those on the margins, those who have been put aside, those who have been marginalized by corporation, by culture, by government. We, faith communities, have to go specifically to them. So this is a non-negotiable for me, and I fight it. And Maggie knows that we fight for her budget all the time, because there are many in the corporation that see this as an add-on, because it's not First Communion, and it's not confirmation, and it's not graduating from a 5-star Catholic school. It's a non-negotiable for me.
I wanted to share this. I come from India, and our churches are very small and very few. But I sometimes wonder whether we as mothers, I have a 20-year-old with autism, we as mothers are the ones preventing, because we are afraid to rock the boat. We are afraid to let our children go forward. We are afraid of all of that. My son, when he accepted Christ, he said, I want to take baptism, but I don't want to get wet. So the church had to come up with an option of what to do without water.
Yeah.
And the church did it. But the thing is that our instinctive reaction was, no, you can't have baptism if you can't get wet. So I think that we as mothers sometimes need to let go of our children and let them let them be confronted with the questions directly instead of being the mediator for our children at all times.
Well, I'm not going to talk about mamas since I had one, and I love them all, so I'm not talking about mamas. Except that one of the mamas inspired my life, Tony Morales. So. Anything else for us?
Response to that question?
Yeah, I think in those puzzle pieces, so forgive me. Somebody actually made me a green and pink apron with puzzle pieces all over it because that's just my brain. But one of the things, too, that I think by a community that embraces that vision, that each piece has this spot that's important. I always say to parents, if that's true, if that is your child and you are coming to a faith community, please don't come in with your head down going, I'm so sorry and I'm apologizing for, and do you have something for my child and will your VBS, can I come? I think if that vision is true, if each one brings a gift to that community, that parent should walk in there and say, have I got a deal for you, right? Yeah. And truly, but it's casting that vision for the community that I think will allow parents to release that child that they've felt they've had to protect, that they felt because they're the only ones that saw the green in that child. And so they're hanging on to that one, maybe not willing to risk putting that one out there again because of some other experiences. But to release that puzzle piece into a community that gets it, I think is a really exciting thing. So that's just a comment, but I totally understand. And parents come in such a variety. I know a beautiful trend that I've seen, literally, I used to get calls from parents that would say, oh, could you help me make a place in this particular community? And now it's calls from the churches. It's like, these parents just dropped off all their kids for Sunday school. What do we do? I'm like, good, you've got the right problem. The right person is calling me. So anyway.
And I think one of the things that's happening, and I think the next big wave in this, so to speak, because as we've seen lots of things grow, is going to be when families and people with disabilities come, as it were, back or to faith communities and say, I'm already included, so to speak, and part of what you say, have we got a deal for you? Or to say, we're here to help you live out your mission that you already talk about.
Right.
You
Yes.
know, so
Yeah.
it's not asking you to do something different. It's asking you to do something fundamental to the very mission you have.
Agents of transformation, yes,
Yeah.
to be agents.
First of all, I would like to commend both of the speakers this morning for raising such good, fertile soil for discussion up. And I would hope that we all would keep in mind, as we all have this morning, that one of the things we want to do in the community that my wife and I are beginning is disabled and non-disabled living together, learning a rhythm of life together, learning how the disabled may do creation care and acts of love to their community that they are living within. But that leads me to point out what this morning has been about for me is really understanding that the process of worship and community with God is a two-way road. And that I, as a person with a disability and a pastor, receive as much and give as much as I am open to. And my call to my community of persons with special needs would be patience, gentleness, understanding, but never stop moving forward and never stop demanding to be allowed to be at your location or your specific point on that two-way road. but it's just been wonderful. So thank you all both.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bishop. It seems to me that a lot of our discussion this week has revolved around more of the formal point of liturgy, like when we gather together in corporate and being inclusive. The way I understand this is that the formal point of liturgy is to help us interpret the informal liturgy of our daily lives. And the reality is that the majority of our congregants, parishioners, faith community participants don't practice community outside of the formal point of liturgy. So I'm interested in hearing how you're nurturing this narrative where, so the question would be like, what's communal about church?
Yeah, yeah.
When the reality is we all go in and we're all looking at the back of people's heads, right?
Yeah, yeah,
I think the Quakers get this right when they have the architecture where they look at each other, you know, in silence and these things. But that's more of an architectonic issue. But I'm just interested in how we can nurture the narrative beyond the formal point of liturgy. Because most of us go home or go out to eat, right? Or we go back to our communities. You know, if you
To our real communities.
Right, right.
To our real communities, right.
And so we tend to further exacerbate
Yeah.
kind of this capitalistic narrative through the way in which we structure the formal liturgy, and then we're wondering why we're not living this out in the informal liturgy of our daily lives. So I'm just interested in that conversation and how you might respond.
Well, I mean, you're right on the money. I'm no expert, but my sense as a 64-year-old man is that we are first and foremost in the majority culture. We are individualists. We act and live as if we are alone on the earth. We take care of ourselves and we choose our friends. And it goes pretty much contrary to sacred scripture, how we are formed in a secular environment. And we are formed in a secular environment. Faith communities are countercultural, more so now than ever, maybe in the last couple of 100 years. So I think you're right on the money. On every level we are called to renewal of heart. In the Catholic tradition, we have a Bishop of Rome who is saying this over and over again. We've gotten it wrong. Let's go back to the kerygma, the beginning. And the beginning is we are one fabric. We are one humanity that God has loved. And our understanding of redemption has brought back to himself to give them new hearts. That is who we are, and we are called to model it. But it's a long road. We don't give up because it's a long road, but it is. It's right there. It stares you in the face every day. When they finish, my brother here, he finished mass, and he says, "Well, good to see you, Bishop." And then he walks to his Lexus, and I walk to my BMW, and we drive to separate neighborhoods, and we have our lives out there, rather than life here. That's the reality of a culture that values the individual over everything. And our faith traditions, maybe the three that are represented in this room, Islam and Judaism and Christianity, we are all about what God has done in the community. Because the Creator, God, is the one that gives us that fellowship.
Thank you. So if I become Catholic, do I get a BMW? Do I get a BMW if I become Catholic?
If you become the right kind of Catholic, that's right.
I didn't know you were into prosperity gospel. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I would love to comment on that too. You know, I think two things about that, and forgive me for being the fix-it woman, but you know, one of the things that I think is important is to listen to people's stories. And one of the things that we found some pretty success, pieces, and other communities call this different things, but we've promoted using something called a GLUE team. GLUE stands for giving, loving, understanding, and encouraging. And basically to say, you know what, do you have any idea what it's like for this family to get up and get to church on this morning? Or do you have any idea that this adult is only allowed to work 8 hours, or they get cut off from their Social Security, and the rest of the time this person is at home? And many times, by allowing the faith community to understand what's going on in a family's life or an individual's life, allows some volunteers to come around. We call them glue teams because sometimes it takes a special adhesive to allow everybody to stick within that place. But it's a great acronym too. But to really intentionally set up some supports that might include One mom came to me, just her older son with Down syndrome. She said, "My biggest fear is that when I go, no one will remember when it's my son's birthday." And so that community listened and put together a team, and there's 4 basic people on that team, and this was a social opportunity. And so each person took 1 week of the month, knew what this young man loved to do. He has more of a social life. He gets to church, he doesn't sit with his mom anymore, he goes sits with one of his friends. And but they're together purposefully during the week. So is it perfect? No. But man, does that church have a party every year on his birthday. That is embedded in the structure of that church. And sometimes I think it's telling people stories and allowing the community to know how can they, because that's one thing we found with glue teams, you need to be specific. This is what is a need. The second thing is this: I'm excited to see what happens when this generation of kids grows up and sort of takes over. Many of the children I know go to schools where hanging out with people with disabilities is no big deal. It's like normal because that's how they go to school. And they're shocked that some people have never met somebody with autism before because they, are in 2nd grade and 6th grade and 8th grade. And, from the school perspective, we've been doing inclusion in our Christian schools since 1989. Oh my goodness. You should see those kids. They just hang out together. They keep hanging out together because they prefer one another. So we're releasing a group of kids that I think, as they get into our churches, as long as we model healthy things. If our model is always, set aside, don't include, well, they're going to pick up that that's what happens at church. But I think I'm excited to see what will happen when we let that younger generation sort of establish the new normal, maybe.
You've got the glue team, Barb, and one of the other resources that's coming out this year is coming out from the Mennonites. It's a little book called Circles of Love. And if you've seen the supportive care in the congregation model, the little book they have around creating intentional circles of support in congregations, this is a follow-up book with 10 stories, not of how people live the model out perfectly, because no model gets lived out perfectly, but how the theory and the commitment around that then organized around 10 different people or families in congregational stories. And it's going to be out this summer. Next month, Christine, I think she put some brochures out. But again, I think you're right, the power of those stories. And then you can get into what I call the really kind of thing of friendly competition. It's like if the First Mennonite Church can do it, well, by God, why can't First Baptist? So it's yeah, those kinds of things. So a couple more questions.
If I can just comment, though, to this question that you had, or discussion, I think what it ultimately comes down to is, as clergy and pastors, is giving your congregation the tools that they will need to live their faith. Because for me, I grew up Catholic. All my friends were Catholic. I went to 16 years of Catholic school. I knew how to be what I thought was Catholic. But when my son was born, I became a mom. And when Christopher died, the notes I got from people who had seen us out in the community told me that I was living my Catholic faith. I had no clue I was doing it, but they were things that I just did because I was a mom and Chris needed it, that affirmed the fact that I I was actually living my faith. And so I think in all our faiths, we need to be able to not make a huge long list, 1 or 2 things a week that somebody's charged to do, that they can take out into their communities and help them make the right, like I always tell teenagers that I depart, make good choices. If you're going to do anything today, make good choices. And so it's giving people the tools that they need to live the faith. Not just listen. We heard a discussion from Dr. Jill yesterday who said faith is listening to the Word, but the Word calls us to act. And so it's hard to act if you don't know, how to do that. And so my recommendation would be to take it to simplicity and keep it very simple, but give your people basic tools of kindness and ways to show love. And there we will all, be able to communicate together in our human condition. So.
I just wanted to share something. I come from a Hindu family and converted to Christianity. And in the Hindu tradition, community is so much so ingrained in us that even when you pray as a collective. You don't pray as an individual. And one of the most difficult things for me was when I became a Christian, I had to pray an I rather than a we. And everybody kept telling me that, no, you need to pray I. And I'm like, I can't even think I. So that whole sense of, and when I became a Christian, the biggest thing to break was the community. And it didn't just affect me, my conversion didn't just affect me, it affected the whole community. And it was like a fabric being torn out, because in the Christian community, it's all individual, and it's not community. And in the Hindu tradition, it comes out so beautifully where I still say my parents carried my cross. And my clan carried my cross. When I became a Christian, my younger sister was forced to marry the guy I was supposed to because I had left home. But it's that kind of community so strongly knit, and I would love to see that in the church. We are part of that So when one hurts, all hurt. And that is something that I find is very difficult to find, but needs to be achieved.
I was thinking support groups. Someone talked about support groups yesterday. Yes. And so in a community where people live as individuals, I think support groups will be a great way of starting a community. For like what she has been saying, it's the same way we come from. In Africa, we live as clans, we have totems, and we have big families. I have a son with cerebral palsy, but I'm here and I'm smiling because I know that my husband's brother is taking good care of him. Why? Because we don't call them uncles. We don't have a language that says uncle or cousin. So when my sons call his brothers, they call them daddy. And so when even if my husband dies, I know they'll still have fathers with them. And that's one of those things that a church should provide. The Bible, the book that we use in church, in the Christian, community, says that let the older women call the younger ones sister, and the older ones be called mothers, and let the elder ones teach the young ones to take care of others. And so, but we have lost that and just continued with what he was talking about, making it a big Sunday service fair, where even the worship we care more about our programs more than we care about people, and we care about order more than we care about integrating others in our programs. So we really have to work on this thing.
Think about three sayings. One, I have some African blood in me since I grew up in Nigeria, but one of them is the proverb of when there's a thorn in the foot, the whole body has to stoop to pluck it out. And the Ubuntu, I am who I am through others, and then the other one I think about is the proverb I learned recently, which is, an enemy is somebody whose story you don't know. Who's somebody whose story you don't know. I think we've got time for one or two more.
Yeah, I find it very good that both of you are here this morning, Barbara and Bishop Talley. My question is, I'm Catholic, and I was wondering how the Catholic Church would implement ideas that come from Barbara and her programs into a very rigid, traditional Catholic liturgy who's not very prone to change.
Well, we have, it's a multifaceted response. There's a structure to liturgy. It doesn't change much. But inside that skeleton, the way I describe it to people when I would talk with people coming into faith, I would describe it, it's like the human body. You have a skeleton, and then you have musculature. The charisms, the specific gifts of the community are the muscles. But muscles without a skeleton don't create a body. But a skeleton can't do anything without muscles. So, in the liturgy, you have a structure. But inside that structure, you can have all kinds of ways of proclaiming the Word of God, ways of bringing the gifts to the table, ways of communicating community. And it's not just in the formal liturgy of a Sunday, what we call Sunday Eucharist, but it's also all kinds of paraliturgies, liturgies of simply coming together in fellowship, fellowship of the Word, fellowship of a meal, sacred around families, around specific needs. And believe me, lots of our parishes that have gotten the message take everything we can get. We steal from everybody. So if there's good stuff here, we take it and run with it. I know I saw Maggie writing down tons of notes when she was speaking, because we'll take the best of what we hear and maybe make our little community a tad better by taking the best of what you have. That's my response.
And he would have a much better response than I would to that. You know, I suppose, I guess I can just say that I've seen lots of different types of communities, large ones, small ones, ones that have a very specific liturgy on, you know, whatever day they worship, versus ones that they just all show up and hang out together. You know, lots of different communities take pieces of that. And actually, I think the vertical habits idea of the wording and of sort of looking at things in that conversational way allows some new tools to maybe be introduced. But I also think, just to comment on that, I think there's some wonderful opportunities too to think, okay, here's an individual. Are there some things that we can do? Maybe advanced visit, maybe practice when there's not all these people in this place. Maybe come when the sanctuary is empty and just practice doing some of the things in that space so that even the practices of that community become more comfortable and a part of that person's language as well. So, you know, I think there's different ways to look at that, and I didn't talk about that at all today given time, but there's so much good we can do with stories and on websites and on previewing what's going to happen in this setting and practicing and, you know, those kinds of things too. So I don't think we have to toss things out necessarily, but how can we take the best of both of those languages and make sure everybody gets a chance to participate. So, but I just seen it happen in some wonderful ways in communities that probably start with the place you mentioned, that is, we are determined to have unity in worship, you know.
I just wanted to share that I come from a church that has nothing but young and aging individuals, and so I have a passion for the heart for everyone. And so I sat back and I looked and saw, how could I bring it all together? And couple of things that I did was I announced that it was summer, and that when we go on vacation and you collect your toilet items, can you bring it to the church? And then we had the teenagers began to develop little care kits, and we went to the family shelters because I wanted to get the church out in the community and to learn about missions. And so they began to go out to the church with the kits because there were family shelters that had children as well as adults. They began to do that, and they found that there were actually their same age individuals in that shelter. And there were people that were giving them counseling about how you need to stay in school and do all these kinds of things. And at the same time, they began to give this. And I started that project at the beginning, and now it's just continued continuously. The same with the seniors. Went to the senior group. I'm still building community. And I said, you know, the birthdays are here, and why don't we give cards out for their birthdays? So we do set up the card. Everyone gets a card for their birthday. And the seniors said, well, we're going to put $1 in there. Everybody gets a card. And then we thought about, well, there are some seniors that have no family. So at the end of the month, we have a birthday cake. And then on the third week, those who would like to go out to lunch, then we go to lunch, and they all pick a site to go. So we're constantly building community. And for the disabled individuals, we are the oldest church in Virginia with scouts for boys and girls. So we went to the scouts and we said, could you mentor some of our children? And in turn, they learned and understood about disability. So I'm saying, think about very creative things. When your heart is out there, you will know and see the need to do. Right now, I'm working on, there are seniors in the back of the room where the pews have been taken out for the wheelchairs. So we're researching how we can get devices to assist with amplifications. So you gotta look around and see those kind of creative things, and sometimes it really doesn't even cost money. So I share that with you.
Thank you.
Somebody here needs to start besides Barb, start collecting all these creative ways of doing things. And so somebody who feels led by the Spirit to do that, let's think about it. Let's give both of them a wonderful hand.
Thank you.